Hey guys, welcome back to MassiveSynth.com tutorials. We're starting a new feature this month, looking at making electronica sounds using Massive, and also looking at making some more kind of experimental sounds, I guess. And start today with this tutorial, making this kind of key sound in Massive. And also I was going to show you how I process this sound using some FabFilter plugins. So I've got the Pro C on here, the compressor, and also FabFilter Saturn, just processing that key sound. So I'll mute these for now and come back to these later, and start off by creating a new sound in Massive. I've got a little low pass filter on there as well, can mute that for now. So that's our basic riff playing. So let's start by programming these oscillators here. Start off an oscillator 1. We're going to use a Polysaw 1 wavetable and take the pitch up by 2 octaves, and maybe pull the amp down to around 2/3. Wavetable position comes all the way to the left, and turn on oscillator 2 next. Take the pitch of this up by 1 octave and pull the wavetable position to the left, and we're going to make this sine square, and pull the amp of this down to around 1/3. We're going to modulate this amp with an envelope in a second. Turn on oscillator 3 and take the pitch of this up by 2 octaves, and this is going to be an Addictive Mix 1 wavetable, and pull the wavetable position to around 1/3 of the way up. We're actually going to modulate this as well for some subtle movement on the sound, and keep the intensity on full. Just pull the amp down to around halfway. So that's our kind of basic wavetables put together. Let's move over to the filter section next, and I'm going to use 2 filters for this sound. In the filter 1 slot I'm going to have a low pass 4, and the cutoff's going to be just a little bit past halfway. Resonance stays around halfway, and pull the volume down a bit. And I'm going to blend this with filter 2, so the blend of the 2 filters is going to be just past halfway towards the second filter, and this is going to be a daft filter. And push the cutoff of this right up, and just pull the resonance down to around 1/4 of the way up, and that resonance is just kind of helping the tone and character of the sound a little bit. Okay, so next let's look at some modulation. So I want this oscillator 2 here. We can just solo this for now, and I want to have this, give this kind of a plucky sort of character. So I'm going to use an envelope to modulate the amp of this. Click and drag the crosshair of envelope 1 to the first modulation slot on the amp there. Click and drag up to push the modulation amount up to full. And now this envelope here is controlling the amp of this oscillator. And let's just take the sustain off and pull the attack up a bit. We've got more of a kind of bell type character there, and just push the decay up a little bit, and then unmute oscillator 1 and oscillator 3. And also oscillator 3, I was going to use a velocity macro to control oscillator 3. So now if you mute the other 2, that's kind of velocity sensitive to some extent there, so that's just going to give some nice variation on the sound depending on how hard we hit the key. Okay, let's move over to the amp envelope now. Just push the attack up slightly, so you're just backing the attack off a little bit. And just the release can go quite high on this. So about 2/3 of the way. So it's just giving the sound quite a nice, kind of softer sort of release tail. Okay, next thing we can look at is some more modulation really, and we were saying this wavetable position on the Oscillator 3. It's quite, just gives a sort of subtle amount of sort of movement. So I'm going to use an LFO here to kind of add that movement into the sound. So click and drag the crosshair this LFO, first modulation slot on the wavetable position of Oscillator 3, click and drag up just a small amount and set this LFO, just pull the rate down to so it's pointing just before the R, and keep the amp of this on full. We don't want to sync it, and just push the X fade curve up so it's a sine wave for this LFO. So and it's just kind of giving the sound a little bit of movement, and it's maybe giving it a bit more of an analog feel, you know, rather than just this kind of pure tone. Every time we hit a key, it's sort of, there's some slight variations going on. Okay, so let's now set up some effects on the sound. So in effects 1 slot, I'm going to add a reverb and pull the dry wet right down. This is quite a subtle amount of reverb, so just push that amount up slightly so it's just a little bit past kind of 0 there, just very subtle. Push the size right up. Density and colour can come up too. And next let's add a chorus, which gives quite a nice character to the sound, and I'm actually going to modulate the dry wet control of this chorus. So pull the dry wet down to 0 for now. Let's go to the second LFO slot here and click and drag the crosshair this LFO to the dry wet control first modulation slot, click and drag up. So now we're getting this kind of like LFO controlling the amount of chorus that we have, which is quite cool. Again, it's adding a bit of movement and some kind of more maybe slightly analog kind of feel to it. So let's push this X fade curve up to the sine wave and actually take the restart off as well as the sync. So this LFO is free flowing basically. It's not going to restart with a new key press. So it's just going to give a kind of more of a random sort of quality to the sound. Pull down the rate slightly, so again it's pointing just before the R, and so now we've got this chorus kind of coming in and out of the sound. We can actually control the amount of chorus that we have on the sound there using a macro. So clear that first macro slot there, click and drag this crosshair this first macro to the second modulation slot and set it up like a side chain. So now hitting that SC button and hitting the kind of dash there until it's an up arrow means that now this is now a volume control for this modulation amount. So you're not going to get any chorus on the sound there until we push that up. So that can control the volume of the chorus there like that. Pull that release down a little bit. So one of the final things to set up with this sound is the noise. So bring a bit of noise into the sound. So this noise here, let's select bright noise, and if I just pull the amp up, this adds quite a nice crispness to the top end, but we could actually give this a bit of a random feel as well. So pull the amp down to 0 and use a performer to control this noise. So click and drag the crosshair this performer over to the first modulation slot on the amp of the noise and just click and drag up. So we've got about 3/4 modulation there. So now we've kind of got an LFO or performer controlling the amp of the noise. So let's set this performer up to sync it, set the ratio to 1/4, take restart off and just pull the steps down to 8, and then set up something like this in this performer slot. So now we've got this kind of free running performer on the kind of noise. So and it's not re-triggering or anything, so it's just constantly running through that kind of sequence. So and we could actually use a macro to control the volume of the noise there as well. So this second macro here, click and drag the crosshair of this to the second modulation slot on the amp of the noise. Check the sidechain feature, check the dash, so it's clicking up. So now we've got this is a volume control for that noise. This is the chorus. Okay, so a couple of final things to set up with the sound now really. I think the filter routing I didn't set up properly to begin with. So route oscillator 1 and oscillator 2 to filter 1. So, and I think we've got too much sustain on this amp envelope here, so I'm just going to edit this, make this a bit tighter, and just pull this release down a bit as well. So it's a bit more like the envelope 1 that we set up before. And let's also add a bit of feedback into the sound just to warm it up a little bit. Okay, well that's the sound set up there. I was going to show you quickly now just how I process this sound using some Fab Filter plugins. So for starters, the Pro C, with this compression here, I actually loaded up the Pump Me to the Radio preset and just tweaked this a little bit. So I got it on classic style, which is just kind of modeling sort of an analog style compressor, basically a soft knee, back the attack off to around halfway, release around halfway, ratios kind of just below 5:1, thresholds minus 18 dB, and I'm getting about 5 or 6 dB of compression there, and I'm just leveling it up with the output. And if I bypass this and unbypass this, it's quite subtle, but it's just helping the tone and the character of the sound. It's controlling some of those dynamics, but it's helping to shape the sound as well and help shape the tone of the sound. So next up with this, I added the Fab Filter Saturn, which has a lovely effect on the sound. And initially the way I set this up was to just have the clean setting, and I was just driving the whole thing. If I unmute this band here, push that drive up, thought it had quite a nice effect on the sound, but where all the energy is on that sound is around the kind of 300 to 700 hertz. There's a lot of energy in that sound. It's where, I guess, where the transients are. And with this Fab Filter Saturn, it had quite a nice effect on the sound, but I thought the mids were just distorting a little bit too much. But being able to use Saturn as a kind of multi-band dynamics, what I could do was isolate this middle kind of frequency band here and mute it, so I'm distorting the kind of bottom end just a little bit. I've got the drive at 50%, and the kind of mids and high mids are pushing the drive a bit higher. And that middle band where most of the energy and the transients are, I'm kind of leaving unaffected, so that doesn't over distort, which is, you know, really cool feature to be able to kind of use multiband dynamics and distortion in this way. So yeah, that's it really. That's the kind of key sound. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. Any questions, then please get in touch, and thanks for watching. Hope to see you again soon. Cheers, bye.